The term philosophy of history refers to the theoretical aspect of history, in two senses. It is customary to distinguish critical philosophy of history from speculative philosophy of history. Critical philosophy of history is the theory aspect of the discipline of academic history, and deals with questions such as the nature of historical evidence, the degree to which objectivity is possible, etc. Speculative philosophy of history is an area of philosophy concerning the eventual significance, if any, of human history. Furthermore, it speculates as to a possible teleological end to its development, that is, it asks if there is a design, purpose, directive principle, or finality in the processes of human history. Part of Marxism, for example, is speculative philosophy of history. Another example is historiosophy, the term coined by Gershom Scholem to describe his understanding of history and metaphysics. Though there is some overlap between the two aspects, they can usually be distinguished. Modern professional historians tend to be skeptical about speculative philosophy of history. Sometimes critical philosophy of history is included under historiography. Philosophy of history should not be confused with the history of philosophy, which is the study of the development of philosophical ideas in their historical context. Speculative philosophy of history asks at least three basic questions. What is the proper unit for the study of the human past, the individual subject, the family, polis or sovereign territory, the civilization or culture, or the whole of the human species? Are there any broad patterns that we can discern through the study of the human past? Are there, for example, patterns of progress, or cycles? Is history deterministic, or are there no patterns or cycles? And is human history regulated by irregularity? Related to this is the study of individual agency and its impact in history, functioning within, or opposed to, larger trends and patterns. If history can indeed be said to progress or cycle, what is its ultimate direction or pattern? What is the driving force of the progress or of the cycles? What does it mean to know, explain and write a history? Pre-modern history. In the Poetics, Aristotle argued that poetry is superior to history because poetry speaks of what must or should be true rather than merely what is true. This reflects early axial concerns over metaphysical concerns for what is. Accordingly, classical historians felt a duty to ennoble the world. In keeping with philosophy of history, it is clear that the philosophy of value imposed upon the process of writing history, philosophy influenced method and hence product. Herodotus, a contemporary of Socrates, broke from Homeric tradition, of passing narrative from generation to generation, in his work, Investigations, also known as Histories. Herodotus is considered, by some, as the first systematic historian, and, later, Plutarch freely invented speeches for their historical figures and chose their historical subjects, with an eye toward morally improving the reader. History was supposed to teach one good examples to follow. The assumption that a history should teach good examples influenced how history was written. Events of the past are just as likely to show bad examples that are not to be followed, but these historians would either not record them or reinterpret them to support their assumption of history's purpose. From the classical period to the Renaissance, historians alternated between focusing on subjects designed to improve mankind and on a devotion to fact. History was composed mainly of hagiographies of monarchs or epic poetry describing heroic gestures such as the Song of Roland about the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. During Charlemagne's first campaign to conquer the Iberian Peninsula, in the 14th century, Ibn Khaldun, who is considered one of the fathers of the philosophy of history, discussed his philosophy of history and society in detail in his Muqaddimah. His work was a culmination of earlier works by sociology and medieval Islam in the spheres of Islamic ethics, political science, and historiography. such as those of al-Farabi, Ibn Miskawayh, al-Dawani, and Nasir al-Din al-Tusi. Ibn Khaldun often criticized idle superstition and uncritical acceptance of historical data. As a result, he introduced a scientific method to the philosophy of history, which was considered something new to his age, and he often referred to it as his new science, which is now associated with historiography. His historical method also laid the groundwork for the observation of the role of state, communication, propaganda, and systematic bias in history. By the 18th century, historians had turned toward a more positivist approach, focusing on fact as much as possible, but still with an eye on telling histories that could instruct and improve. Starting with Fustel de Coulanges and Theodore Mommsen, historical studies began to progress towards a more modern scientific form. In the Victorian era, the debate in historiography thus was not so much whether history was intended to improve the reader, but what causes turned history and how historical change could be understood. Cyclical and linear history. History tends to follow an assumption of linear progression. This happened, and then that happened because this happened first. Many ancient cultures held a mythical conception of history and time that was not linear. They believed that history was cyclical with alternating dark and golden ages. Plato called this the Great Year, and other Greeks called it an aeon or eon. Examples are the ancient doctrine of eternal return, which existed in ancient Egypt, the Indian religions, or the Greek Pythagoreans and the Stoics' conceptions. In the Works and Days, Hesiod described 5 ages of man: the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Heroic Age, and the Iron Age, which began with the Dorian invasion. Other scholars suggest there were just 4 ages, corresponding to the 4 metals, and the Heroic Age was a description of the Bronze Age. A 4-age count would be in line with the Vedic or Hindu ages known as the Kali, Dwapara, Treta and Satya Yugas. According to Jainism, this world has no beginning or end but goes through cycles of upturns and downturns constantly. Many Greeks believed that just as mankind went through 4 stages of character during each rise and fall of history, so did government. They considered democracy and monarchy as the healthy regimes of the higher ages, and oligarchy and tyranny as corrupted regimes common to the lower ages. In the East, cyclical theories of history were developed in China and in the Islamic world by Ibn Khaldun. The story of the fall of man from the Garden of Eden in Judaism and Christianity can be seen in a similar light, which would give the basis for theodicies, which attempts to reconcile the existence of evil in the world with the existence of God, creating a global explanation of history with the belief in a messianic age. Theodicies claimed that history had a progressive direction leading to an eschatological end, such as the apocalypse, given by a superior power. Augustine of Hippo, Thomas Aquinas or Bossuet in his discourse on universal history formulated such theodicies, but Leibniz, who coined the term, was the most famous philosopher who created a theodicy. Leibniz based his explanation on the principle of sufficient reason, which states that anything that happens, does happen for a specific reason. Thus, what man saw as evil, such as wars, epidemia and natural disasters, was in fact only an effect of his perception. If one adopted God's view, this evil event in fact only took place in the larger divine plan. Hence, theodicies explained the necessity of evil as a relative element that forms part of a larger plan of history. Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason was not, however, a gesture of fatalism. Confronted with the antique problem of future contingents, Leibniz invented the theory of compossible worlds, distinguishing 2 types of necessity, to cope with the problem of determinism. During the Renaissance, cyclical conceptions of history would become common, illustrated by the decline of the Roman Empire. Machiavelli's discourses on Livy are an example. The notion of empire contained in itself its ascendance and its decadence. as in Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which was placed on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. Cyclical conceptions were maintained in the 19th and 20th centuries by authors such as Oswald Spengler, Nikolai Danilevsky, and Paul Kennedy, who conceived the human past as a series of repetitive rises and falls. Spengler, like Butterfield, was writing in reaction to the carnage of the First World War, believed that a civilization enters upon an era of Caesarism after its soul dies. He thought that the soul of the West was dead and Caesarism was about to begin. The recent development of mathematical models of long-term secular socio-demographic cycles has revived interest in cyclical theories of history. Sustainable history. Sustainable history and the dignity of man is a philosophy of history proposed by Naifal Rodin, where history is defined as a durable progressive trajectory in which the quality of life on this planet or all other planets is premised on the guarantee of human dignity for all at all times under all circumstances. This theory views history as a linear progression propelled by good governance, which is, in turn, to be achieved through balancing the emotional, amoral, and egoistic elements of human nature with the human dignity needs of reason, security, human rights, accountability, transparency, justice, opportunity, innovation, and inclusiveness. Human dignity lies at the heart of this theory and is paramount for ensuring the sustainable history of humankind. Among other things, human dignity means having a positive sense of self and instilling individuals with respect for the communities to which they belong. Thus, reconciling humans' predisposition for emotionally self-interested behavior with the imperatives of human dignity appears as one of the most important challenges to global policymakers. At national level, they have to protect their citizens against violence and provide them with access to food, housing, clothes, healthcare, and education. Basic welfare provision and security are fundamental to ensuring human dignity. Environment and ecological considerations need to be addressed as well. Finally, cultural diversity, inclusiveness and participation at all levels of all communities are key imperatives of human dignity. In this respect, the sustainable history philosophy challenges existing concepts of civilizations, such as Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. Instead, it argues that human civilization should not be thought of as consisting of numerous separate and competing civilizations, but rather it should be thought of collectively as only one human civilization. Within this civilization are many geocultural domains that comprise subcultures. Naifal Rodin envisions human civilization as an ocean into which the different geocultural domains flow like rivers. The ocean model of one human civilization. However, over time, all the rivers of geocultural domains became one. There is fluidity at the ocean's center and cultures have the opportunity to borrow between them. Under such historical conditions, the most advanced forms of human enterprise can thrive and lead us to a civilizational triumph. Nevertheless, there are cases where geographical proximity of various cultures can also lead to friction and conflict. Naifal Rodin concludes that within an increasingly globalized, interconnected and interdependent world, human dignity cannot be ensured globally and in a sustainable way through sole national means. A genuine global effort is required to meet the minimum criteria of human dignity globally. Areas such as conflict prevention, socio-economic justice, gender equality, protection of human rights, environmental protection require a holistic approach and a common action.